Cartagena from AutoNation, Mike DeMilt from Weeks Auto Group, Matt Greitzer from Accordant Media, Patty Hannon, Chief Analytics Officer at Edmunds.com, and Andrew McClay, Director of Digital Marketing at Dealer.com. So I'm very excited. I think the team at MediaPost did a really cool job of assembling a really varied panel. We've got large dealer groups, small dealer groups, platforms, media companies, third-party sites all represented on here. So I think I'm excited to have a really cool conversation. Like I said, less on can digital move metal. I think it's 2016 and you wouldn't all be in the room, I don't think, if by now we hadn't realized that digital can move metal. So the first topic that I think we've all want to talk about, love to get all of your experiences and insights on how you see digital actually moving metal. So Andy, if I could start with you. Dealer.com serves thousands of dealers across the U.S.
Many thousands.
Yeah. So what types of digital strategies do you see driving metal for them?
Sure. So it's a good question, Monik. For us, it is how do you sort of customize a strategy for a dealer type, right? There are many different strategies based on the size of a dealership. There's sort of geo, the demographics around it. But really for us, it's two sort of main things. If we're talking digital advertising, it is, demand capture and demand generation. And so those two sort of strategies are what change up between the sort of dealership types. So if I'm a small dealership, I think that if I had, $2 to spend on, my marketing budget, and, I feel for some of the internet managers out there because sometimes it does feel like $2, demand capture is generally the first thing that I would go for. And when I say that, we're talking about channels like paid search, retargeting, but then you move into, I think, some of, the larger automotive groups out there, you can really move towards a branding play, and that's demand generation. That's when we talk about things like audience targeting, network display buys, premium advertising networks, and those pieces, that's really how you begin to sort of move the needle there and increase that demand capture.
That's great, Melissa. You're nodding, so obviously you're agreeing. What are you seeing from a large dealer group standpoint?
From our perspective, from my perspective personally too, as a marketer, some of the things that I've seen a lot of growth in is the digital advertising space in terms of display, what people call display, and how that actually interacts with other channels as well, and the impact it has across all those channels as well. So I see a lot of growth in that overall.
Fantastic. And Mike, what about from a smaller dealer?
Sure. So where I sit, it's all about the marketing mix, and the mix is absolutely shifting towards digital. Being a small dealership, I have a Porsche, Volkswagen, Audi, and a pre-owned. So each one has a separate rooftop. So it's a lot of different managing. Full disclosure, Dealer.com is who we use for our digital marketing. So I'll be nice.
Thank you.
But it is very critical. I'm kind of new to the auto business, but I came in for the digital component to drive that shift. So being a master juggler, it's kind of changing the ingredients in the stew.
It's really interesting. You talk about, yes, we're a small dealer, but you broke it down even further than that because you've got an Audi segment that's actually very different than a Volkswagen segment.
Well, with digital marketing, with my Porsche dealership, we sell cars to people in California, Chicago. People will shop nationwide for something very specific.
Right.
More on the Volkswagen or Audi, it's very regional, so my digital marketing is very targeted.
Matt, how can Accordant's all about programmatic. I mean, what is programmatic? I'm not sure.
Right. So we come at this from a very specific angle and really a media angle, and in a programmatic media world, using data to target consumers in the most effective way. And in the auto space, that's really important for a number of reasons. One is different different brands, different makes, models, different types of consumers who are shopping different kinds of vehicles. And you have to understand that, or else you're going to mismatch your message to your target. But I think more importantly is kind of where people are in the purchase process. And you talk about demand capture. Somebody's ready to buy, they're in a very different stage and open to a very different message than somebody who's in the dreaming stage or the research stage. And if you have finite budgets, finite acquisition budgets, you really have to know who's really in the buying phase right now versus who's in the research phase or even just the browsing and interest phase. And so, using data and kind of applying data to the digital landscape to be able to make those decisions in a smart way is imperative. And I think today, especially too, when somebody walks into the dealership, they know what they're going to do. They've already done their research, and your ability at the dealership to make them make a decision is considerably less than it was 15, 20 years ago. So you want to be smart about how you're reaching them in the digital channel. So when they get to the dealership, you've already had that message in front of them appropriately.
So how can, you're saying you're leveraging data and technology to help make the dealers smarter. Can you give us a really kind of good, kind of granular example of programmatic's this wonderful buzzword these days, right? Everyone's talking about, you got to buy programmatically and so on and so forth. But I also find that for folks that are not big media spenders, programmatic can be almost a scary kind of thing. It's like, ooh, that sounds like computers and stuff. Can you help us make that, help make it simple?
Yeah, if you're not in the digital media space, you are in the auto space, you're probably familiar with the whole offline data ecosystem of offline data that you can buy or license, which tells you who's in market for a car or who's going to be in market for a car. Very similar data ecosystem exists online, and you can license data which tells you sort of who's in market for a car, who's intending to be in market for a car, who's interested in a car. And so there's a rich third-party data ecosystem online that marketers can tap into. And then depending on who you are in the ecosystem, if you're an OEM or if you're a dealer, you have very rich data of your own from your website, from your search marketing campaigns, from your email campaigns, from all of the things that you're doing as a marketer, which is incredibly valuable and can be leveraged in a really effective way to target customers who are engaging with you. I think a real simple example is retargeting, and that's a fairly standard tactic these days, but not everybody is employing it. Somebody comes to your website, get back to them with a relevant message and a relevant ad creative to re-engage them.
Yeah, that's great. So, you mentioned retargeting, and again, that's like, we're talking about that sort of demand capture and using the resources that you build sort of on your home website. And, for dealers, that sort of situation right there is a really cost-effective way to stay in front of people that are in market.
The tricky thing with that, though, is making sure you're delivering the right message to the person, because, you can see it in the stats, the rise of ad blockers and a lot of other technologies, because people don't want to get messages when they're essentially just big billboards. Mm-hmm. And really the important thing is making sure you're delivering value to the consumer when you're trying to connect with them. What can you do as an advertiser or as a dealer or as a third-party website that really gives the consumer something unique, whether it's a piece of information, whether it's a special offer, whether it's a way of communicating with the dealer that is appropriate for them in the channel that they're in, whether they're researching or they're real low funnel and they want to find out, hey, is this car in stock?
Yeah.
I think the delivering value in the mechanism by which the consumer wants to communicate is extremely important.
The personalization aspect is very important, and it's challenging to do it well. It's very possible. It's very technically feasible, and there are people who, I would say AutoNation does it very well in terms of being relevant. Yeah. They know what somebody's looking for on site, and they deliver a relevant message back to that person based on what they've done on site. So it's very possible, it's very feasible, but it requires some investment, some upfront investment to get it right. But if you do get it right, if you make the upfront investment, it pays off.
You can have a huge impact. We've been seeing that with some of the tests that we've been running. leveraging platforms, whether it's Facebook or our own native ad server platforms, that can really drive huge engagement. I mean, we've seen, for some dealer groups up to a 20% lift in lead volume based on creating targeted, relevant, native advertising on the right platforms.
Go ahead, Melissa, you have
No, I was
something
just
to add?
going to say that it's all about time, place, and message. That's
Yeah.
really what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think that, it also is the ability to sort of look at what are shopping indicators and
Yeah.
behaviors inside of whatever ecosystem that you're using. We have the capability now to sort of, pick apart and look at, Kelley Blue Book or Auto Trader, and then what's happening inside of the dealer.com. I know that Edmunds is doing a great job with very sort of similar technology, but back to what you were just saying there, can you look at the right time and sort of pluck the people out of this ecosystem and say, hey, this person is exhibiting shopping behavior.
Right.
This is the right message that we should be putting in front of them.
And how do you get them to actually take an action, right? So they're exhibiting shopping behavior, and this speaks to the OEMs with their incentive programs to a certain extent. You're exhibiting shopping behavior. I'm about to buy a car. You're about to buy a car. I'm going to buy it no matter what. You're kind of on the fence. If I'm an OEM, wouldn't it be great if I could give you the incentive and not give it to me because I'm going to buy the car anyway? Like if you can, and that's where I talk about delivering value to the consumer and to the manufacturer and to the dealer, which is to move metal, right? If I can find those people, segment people using the data that we do have, and deliver a targeted, whether it's cash offer or some other thing to get you to pull that demand forward, that's a really, really powerful thing that any of us in the digital ecosystem should be able to develop and deliver, provided you have the scale and the inventory to do so.
So what if I don't have scale? I mean, it's like we've got lots of, how many groups, how many folks here are with dealerships, with dealer bodies, dealer groups?
0.
Okay.
They're up here.
The question I was going to, I guess I'll still ask the question. If you don't have massive scale, you don't have these huge databases and data warehouses full of data, where do you start on this journey of leveraging data? How can I start to do that?
I think there's 3 people here that would be happy to help with that problem.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So then tell me how you'd start so I can figure out which one of the 3 of you I want to pick.
I mean, honestly, the Auto Traders, the Kelley Blue Books, the Edmunds of the world, you talked about, you were probably referring to Blue Kai or Polk data that's available for sale on Facebook or on the exchanges at large. Getting access to that audience at scale is really tough, and you have to have a compelling platform to do it. I mean, we spend a lot of money and a lot of energy to develop content that consumers care about. So we rank really well in Google. We spend a lot of money on SEM to bring in, we have to do the same thing the dealers do, right? We have to attract people into our website. We have to provide them a rich experience. And in doing that, we create a ecosystem of shoppers that I think is almost second to none.
Yeah,
Is second to none, actually, if you look at the last Compete study that we did.
I will say this, though. There still is, and I don't want to say it's room for improvement, but, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, when I think back to maybe it was 2014 NADA, it was basically the media mix of an average dealership. And I think it was something like 27% of the budget goes to digital. And so that's sort of a catch-all there. But you still have all of these other channels, television, radio, that are consuming a huge amount of budget. And so, we can sort of wax up here all day about the very cool things that we're doing as our companies for the most progressive dealers. But there still is a lot of work to go just inside of the traditional dealer body. Again, we've got 2 people up here from very, very progressive dealerships, but there still is a long way to go on just, paid search or retargeting to, capture where people are actually shopping. And so I think there's a lot of runway still left in this industry.
And there's new platforms coming out all the time. I mean, you have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Instagram. I mean, you have an explosion of advertising platforms, and we have progressive dealers that do have big SEM spends, and they are getting in the right places, but every time a new platform comes up, that's a new area that you have to explore because it's a new consumer, right? It's a new consumer that you can attract. It's a new conversation you can have. And it gets back to your point about being in the right place at the right time, and your point as well, and in the right channel. Whether that's a text message platform, whether it's using Facebook Messenger, whether it's, being in Snapchat.
It could be very easily overwhelming for a dealer group, a small dealer group, or a small dealership in general, just to be able to grasp any of this because it's a lot of work. So
I've got large clients for whom it's also overwhelming.
sure. I mean, even for us, it was a lot of work to find the right partner to work with to be able to tap into any of this. So I can imagine for a small dealership, it can be extremely challenging for them. So it's really just very important to do the right research, find the right partner, and be able to leverage them throughout that whole process of, just tapping into that particular channel.
You had some insights. I know we were talking earlier about finding the right partner. Do you want to spend a bit
We went
more time
through a
talking
very
about that?
rigorous process, RFP process, to find the right fit for us, but it's different for everyone. It really depends on what you're looking to try and do and how you're going to go about it. And some of the things that were really important to us was transparency. Working with a partner that's transparent with us and has our best interests at heart was very important to us. So it's just, it's research, and it's, just having those conversations with those people and having them really understand what your needs are so that you can be sure that they're going to meet those needs for you in that relationship that you build.
Sure. We spent a bunch of time talking about advertising, digital advertising. Digital's, for me, much broader than that. I'm sure you would all agree. I know you guys have tons and tons of data. You've been a huge third-party site for many years. You probably didn't build all of that by paying for media. What other types of things work for dealers, and what other strategies should they be thinking about in terms of generating demand that don't necessarily require huge media spends?
Well, I think demand has a lot of different facets to it, and it's user segmentation, right? So there's people that will come to a third-party website and won't go to a dealer website. There's people that will only go to a dealer website and won't come to a third-party website. One of our strategies is to understand where the consumers are, and then to work with companies, whether it's dealer.com or others, to make sure that we can put our information out wherever the consumer is. So whether that's building widgets for the dealer websites or building information right onto our site. Once we kind of are in the different places the consumer is at, we also spend a lot building editorial content and providing value to the consumer, right? I mean, if you provide something that people want, whether that's a car review, whether that's specifications, whether that's here's all the Toyota Celicas that are available in your market, you'll rank well with Google. You will drive in that traffic, and our goal is to make sure that whatever traffic is coming in, we can help that person fulfill whatever it is they're doing, whether it's car research or it's shopping for a car, and connect them with a dealership or connect them with the OEM to get even richer information that we may not have. So I think it's really, really important to look at the whole ecosystem and figure out where the consumers are, segment yourself, and give yourself an opportunity. We can't just spend, we don't have the budgets to spend billions of dollars on advertising, right? Even if we did, we wouldn't get every single consumer in the United States. So we need to go where they are, whether they're on Facebook, if they're on Snapchat, if they're on Instagram, if they're on a dealer website. We need to go to where the consumers are and try to provide value in those channels.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up a good point that had me sort of thinking here as well. For a tier 3 dealer, a quality SEO strategy is still very, very important.
Yeah.
And we all know, that the amount of space on Bing, on Google, what have you, is not increasing for the organic searches, right? And as a matter of fact, it's becoming more competitive inside of the paid search spaces. So that actually means that your SEO strategy has to be that much more dialed in. And the only way that you really get that done is by providing resources.
Yeah.
And you just said that is exactly what Edmunds does. Well, that's the same thing that a local dealer needs to do. If they want to show up in the organic results on the first page of Google, they have to be providing resources, not just linking with meta tags and all of those things that used to work in 2006. That's done. It is elbow grease moving forward from this point. And so it's a difficult sort of choice that dealers have. They have to say, hey, do I bring this in-house or do I outsource this to, a third-party provider? Somebody that I, trust has my best interest in line. And really that's like outside of it, we can sort of sit here in an arms race for advertising dollars until the cows come home, right? But there are still some very basic functions that we need to make sure we get done at the local level here. And honestly, that's one of them. And it's tricky, right? Because you used to be able to hire somebody who would make 1,000 backlinks to, they could outsource that in a third world country to have that done, right? And that just does not exist anymore. You have to have people actually writing content.
Yeah, you got to have content. I mean, that's what the search engines are looking for. And if you're going to rank, you need that depth of content.
Yeah, the point about outsourcing and trust is critical. There's no way I could be a digital marketing expert as well as doing out-of-home broadcast, social media, and all those things. So you have to get to the point where you trust your analyst, and for the most part, you can set it and forget it for the month, and then look at your analytics at the end of the month. Without that, it's impossible to cover all the different components of the job. I mean, I've learned very quickly it's to be a master juggler, but you really have to be a chameleon and sometimes a magician to make it all work. So we do rely on dealer.com for 2 of our properties, but you do have to watch the analytics just to make sure it's a check and balance, because we want to make sure we're getting what we're looking for, and if they're busy as well, they're growing by leaps and bounds as well. So their success is something you want to keep in check as well.
Mike, there's some other things. We talked about the basics like SEO, but there's some other kind of basics that I think you guys are doing, Weeks is doing in the social space.
Well, there's a fundamental issue. Form submissions are going down in the industry. It's not because there are less shoppers. The theory is there are more mobile shoppers, and mobile shoppers on their phone are not hammering through and filling out forms. The option on mobile sites is often click here to call. Most people do not want to call, get that salesman on the other end of the line who's going to try to close them that day.
Exactly.
So there's a hole in the process right now. We're working to address that. It's communicating in the medium people want to.
Right.
So we're looking at text enabling, inbound texting. We're fully respecting outbound texting. But there are issues there that you have to adjust, because the change in mobile shopping has changed the form submission.
That change in mobile is why, Edmunds a few years ago bought our first company, which is called CarCode, and it's a text platform, because we saw that there's a real need for there was real desire for consumers to connect in a different way than a phone call. And if you can respect the mode of communication that the consumer wants, I think that's a huge step forward. And it's going to keep changing, and I think this is why there's a place for companies like Edmunds, companies like dealer.com, third parties that can help digitally enable the dealers, because it's not their bread and butter. I mean, your bread and butter is selling cars, our bread and butter is technology. I think we can help each other.
If you go to danburyaudi.com, we turned on Edmunds' text capability at 11 a.m. this morning.
Oh, did you? Nice.
So it was the first thing. I've been here a couple of months, and it was immediate. We had to find a solution, because we had to use a third-party bolt-on. Edmunds was there, and we're live, so we're testing it right now.
It's interesting. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to comment on the decline in form submissions, and I think that's interesting from a macro level in terms of measurement and historically a lead-driven sales channel, and sort of drive leads drive people to the dealership, bring them to the dealership, I'll sell them. That's the model. That's broken now because people do not submit leads anymore, or at least they're submitting leads with much, much less frequency. So there's a whole different shift in mindset around measurement and how do you actually, does digital move metal? Yes. Well, how do you measure that it moves metal? That's a whole different challenge now, and it's not an easy one, but you need to have a good strategy around that, I think, in order to figure out the investment strategy behind it.
It's really interesting. You're saying there's things that we know work or that have worked, but now there's things that are changing. Mobile is changing consumer behavior. What other types of disruptions to the status quo are you guys seeing that kind of worry you?
A couple of the disruptions that come to my head, one being adware, taking away from the user experience on a website, happens from time to time. The other is ad fraud. We really haven't touched on that, but that's definitely something that is a concern, and it's a challenging thing to take on head on. But in working with our partners, we've been able to kind of understand it and work with them and keep that sort of at bay, for lack of a better term. So.
Okay. Matt, what kinds of disruptions are you guys seeing? So we've got mobile.
I mean, we talked about
what else
mobile.
is? What else is?
Look, I think mobile is a big one. I don't think we could get off that topic soon enough. I mean, I think Edmund's probably we work with a competitor in the space. More than 50% of the traffic on site is mobile traffic.
I mean, we're seeing similar things.
Yeah, and what does that do to the monetization strategy for a publisher in the space? What does that do to the measurement strategy for a dealer? What does that do to the ability to reach somebody with a message that has an impact on a 4x3 screen or a 4x2 screen? So that shift is happening, and it's happening really fast, and it's only accelerating. So I think people who grapple with that and who have an effective strategy today, or who are at least thinking of an effective strategy today, are going to be much, much better off than those who are really still thinking about a desktop world, or even a television-only world.
While mobile may be disruptive, it's also a huge opportunity. The mobile shoppers that we see are much more engaged with inventory. They seem to be much lower funnel. They're driving around looking for inventory. They're driving around shopping for a car on a Saturday. And it really behooves all of us to make sure we're providing the tools that person can connect. I think that the lead form, it may be broken, but it's a way that consumers can start a conversation. What other ways can we provide so the consumer can start a conversation with the dealership? I mean, we're all here to do the same thing, right? The consumer wants to buy a car, the dealer wants to sell a car, and OEM's building the car to be sold. I mean, it's a positive ecosystem. It's just getting through some of the cruft and giving people access to the information and giving it to a way that they can feel safe in the way they're communicating.
Yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about disruptors to the industry, the number one biggest disruptor, I think, to all of this is moving a lot of that in-store sales process online and allowing people to shop for cars the same way that they shop for everything else.
Yep.
Because I can guarantee you, I can pull this audience right here and say, hey, how many of you guys, when you buy a car, want to sit inside the dealership even longer? Nobody, and I guarantee even our dealer friends up here are like, hey, I would love to shorten this process for my clients, give them a great experience. And to be honest with you, a lot of that can be done online if you have the right resources. And so I think in the very near future here, what we're going to be offering is consumers an ability to purchase a car online, go into the store if they want to shop for a car and touch the car, have that experience. But really what we're doing is we're giving them an option, several different options. And I do think personally, and this is sort of good conversation to have up here with actual car dealers, because I think that is going to, at the very least, it's going to fundamentally change the way that a salesperson interacts with a consumer. And I know that, you know, just at the very sort of heart of it, that if we want to talk about leads, people that are leaving their credit information or actually, you know, getting a trade valuation on their car, those leads close, right? Those are the most qualified people that you can possibly have.
Right.
So that's where I see sort of the biggest disruption here.
And I had a great experience with AutoNation a couple of years ago. I sold my car through AutoNation Direct, and I did the whole thing online. I just drove into the store and dropped off my car. Why can't I buy my car the same way?
Totally.
I mean, that would be a huge disruption, and I think we all are trying to work towards that. There's a lot of legalities, there's a lot of legal issues around it, there's franchise laws, there's a lot of things to get there, but it's gonna happen at some point in time.
I gotta believe, you know, the previous panel talked about millennials and the challenge of millennials, frankly, not even knowing that they want a car or believing that they can afford a car. And then if the process of actually buying one is still a big hassle, it just seems like that just further exacerbates the problem. So I think you're very right. So it's very interesting, right? We've got a set of things that we think are working for us today, but we're looking at increased mobile use amongst millennials who don't want to buy cars and want to buy things differently. So against that kind of backdrop, what are the types of things that you guys are experimenting with? Melissa, I'll start with you. What are you experimenting with as new ways of engaging, new ways of contacting?
The one thing that we've focused on the most this past year has really been in the programmatic media space and testing in that arena and just continuing to get our message out there and trying to see how that, you know, can drive users down that funnel the way that we want them to. And also working very closely with other channels and being able to kind of tie all that together. So that's really been the biggest thing that's been a focus for us.
Okay. And Andy, what are some of the things that Dealer.com is experimenting with, working on behalf of, you know, what did you say, how many thousands of dealers did you say?
It's a squiggly line, 14,000.
Yeah, so a lot of dealers.
Franchise dealers.
A lot of franchise dealers.
Yeah, that's quite a few, and you know, there's a whole huge sort of space of, I would call it a high-end pre-owned dealer that is sort of out there waiting to be, you know, brought into this digital world. But, you know, the things that we're looking at is, you know, for us, you know, same thing with, you know, everybody else that has sort of made this investment. It's refining and sort of figuring out how we utilize this huge pool of data. And I know that, you know, big data is so 2014. But really, like, how do we use that insight that we have to sort of better target our advertising? There are definitely new channels, and I think that we haven't done a really good job of programmatically figuring out video at this point, and the video advertising channel. Like, how do you develop content sort of at scale? And that's one of, you know, the big areas that we're looking into right now. And I think that that's going to be big for everybody. I mean, outside of automotive, in general, it's how do you sort of figure out what's going on with video, mobile video particularly. Are we using Facebook, or are we doing this sort of programmatically? And that's one of our big challenges.
Well, and Facebook just announced their new lead ads with the video component. So
Yep.
how do you leverage that? It's definitely going to be key.
Totally.
I mean, those are some of the things that when I think about experimentation that we're really looking into. What can we do? I'm on a panel next week at NADA, I think with you, talking about Facebook and some of the things that we're doing with Facebook. How can we provide new opportunities for the dealers? So we're exploring whether it's Facebook or other platforms. What can we do to draw that audience in? But once you've drawn that audience in, you still have a challenge. I was at a dealership on Wednesday talking with the principal, and we were talking about some of the programs we have. It's like, I can give you a 40-50% lift in your leads if you just do X, Y, or Z. And his sales manager looked at me and said, I don't want a 40% increase in leads. I can't handle the people that are coming in now.
Right.
So we're really exploring some really interesting cutting-edge technology around artificial intelligence to auto-respond to text messages, to incoming emails, and provide a conversation with the consumer that the computer can have, And then when it gets to a point where a salesperson needs to get involved, we can siphon it off to a salesperson or to our own live advice team internally at Edmunds. You can actually call or email Edmunds and we'll respond. So we're going to see if we can beef that team out and experiment with responding on behalf of the dealer for a little while until it gets to the point where that's a really qualified person that needs to come into the store. So I think for us, the experimentation is on a couple of different fronts. One is new ways of bringing people in, new channels for them to communicate, and then 3, how do we enable the dealerships to be the most effective that they can be, and what tools can we provide them, whether it's through artificial intelligence or through our own almost semi-outsourced BDC or internet customer support center to convert those people and bring in really high-quality people to the dealerships.
Matt, it's interesting. I asked a question around what are you experimenting with, and the first 2 folks talked about programmatic. How in this changing environment of millennials and mobile and new shopping, how can programmatic help? How can dealers leverage programmatic to help them?
Yeah, I mean, well, we really focus more on the demand generation and demand capture side of it, and less on the experience side of it. But I think in a few ways. One is the ability to parse data to know to whom you're speaking and what kind of message you should deliver to them. So that's where programmatic works in a way that is fundamentally different than any kind of traditional media. Is the person you're speaking to at the point you're speaking to them, and you can render a message that is appropriately tailored to them. So that's one way. I think the other way is just the ability to access consumers in a more efficient way than you can through offline media. And we've talked a lot about digital, and recently talking about video, this sort of convergence of television and video, and where those two things are coming together. Just as people aren't filling out lead forms as much anymore, they're not watching as much television. At least they're not watching as much linear broadcast or cable television as they used to. So if you want to reach somebody with a high impact ad in an environment where they're going to see it, it's harder to do that than it used to be. And with programmatic, particularly programmatic video, over-the-top video, some of the things you can do programmatically, you can get at that audience in a fairly scalable and fairly efficient way, in essence, continue to engage a type of consumer who you're going to have a harder and harder time finding in the more traditional channels.
Mike, you mentioned the mobile challenge. What types of things are you guys experimenting with to better connect at that level?
Well, it's certainly making sure everything we put out is optimized for mobile.
Okay.
Sounds fundamental, but a lot of times people overlook that, and that's critical.
Yeah.
The user experience online should be fluid, as well as when they get on their phone, it should be even better. Because the mobile shopper is more demanding, they just expect things to work, and they expect it to be automatic. We're embracing the empowered shopper. A lot of the salespeople who are old school, they liked having the power across the desk. We want them to understand the people coming in, it's the psychology of shopping that's changed. They're coming in with the data, with the numbers, ready to make a deal, and that's helping the process go more smoothly. Mm-hmm. But some of our old school salesmen, they want to, pull the most money out, and it's a change game.
Yeah.
The quick on millennials, I have 2 sons in college. They're waiting for cars.amazon.com, push the button, the car's in their driveway.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's not so far-fetched. I just don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years or whatever. But it to some degree, not Amazon, but to some degree that's coming.
No, it's just a demand to shop the way that they shop. It shouldn't be, listen, there are 2 huge purchases in your life. We all know this, houses, cars, right? And cars are tricky, but it is not out of the realm of possibility, right? We have the technological capability, and, there are some companies that are out there already sort of experimenting with this, but it really is just giving them the option to do things the way that they normally do it in their everyday life. And it's going to happen on a phone. It's going to happen quickly. And it honestly benefits the dealer at the end of the day because it could have been Edmunds, but for every 5 minutes that you leave somebody sort of sitting in a chair at the dealership, that to them, to a dealership, a CSI score is a big deal.
Yeah.
Right? And that risks CSI scores and bad experiences by making people sort of wait longer. And so allowing them to sort of shop the way that they want to shop, huge improvement in overall customer experience.
For sure, for sure. Guys, I want to thank you. I'm getting the let's go sign from over there. Just wanted to make sure that if there's quick opportunity for questions.
Yeah, we could do a question, maybe
if there's
one.
questions for the panel.
Got one.
There's one.
I have one over here.
Okay.
Hi. I had a quick question on the idea of virtual reality and augmented reality becoming mainstream as a platform similar to a website. It's almost like the way you mentioned that the dealer-consumer interaction can be replicated and via virtual reality and augmented reality. Do you foresee it becoming mainstream in sooner than later? Like, what's your sense around the timing for this?
I saw an app demo, I think it was last week or the week before, of somebody with a interior 360 where they just held their phone up and they moved around as if they were inside the car. So I think that sort of stuff is coming. And I totally agree, people are going to want to shop and buy online. And in order to do that, you still need to get that visceral experience of the car, right? You still want that emotional connection to the car. And I think virtual reality and augmented reality might be a way of helping convey that to the consumer online.
Yeah, I mean, definitely it is coming. There's no doubt about it. Whether or not every household is going to have an Oculus Rift in it in 6 months, like that's difficult to say. But I mean, there are already companies that are out there giving basically virtual tours inside of the car, software that we partner with. And so I think at the very least, augmented reality is an inevitability. Definitely sort of VR it's tough for me to predict. But yes, for sure, it is coming down the road.
I still want to thank you for that question, because that was the one question I wanted to ask before Ross told me to hurry up. Because I don't know if you guys have had a chance to walk the floor, but Lexus has an interesting VR experience upstairs. And I've long believed that as VR became more mainstream, it's the perfect immersive experience. So I don't know if you guys have had a chance to see it, but it's a good, for me, it's like a good first foray into where this world is gonna head. For sure. Are there other questions?
Well, if there are,
Got one more.
actually, we will have to take them. We have to wrap. Sorry, Tanya.
Okay.
And sorry.
Sorry.
If you'll stick around, or take it outside or something, if people have more questions for the panel, that'd be great.
Sure.
But thank you, Monique. Thank you, panel. It was great.
Thank you guys. Very much.
Would like to invite our last panel of the day to take the stage. I believe you're all in the back there. So come forward, please. Okay, thank you. Close to 17% of the population identifies as Hispanic, and that share is growing fast, especially amongst millennials and Gen Z. On the one hand, automakers want to reach the transcultural mainstream that we heard about earlier, and on the other, generalizing can turn many off. So here to lead this one, we asked Ed Reneker, the COO of Cablevision Media Sales. So please welcome Ed and panel.
That's fine. Thank you, everyone. So how many panels have been before us?
This is the fourth.
Oh, good. You guys are still here. Excellent. Okay, well, welcome and to our panel, Engaging Hispanics. My panelists today include Mitzi Lopez Baranello, Rochelle Newman Carrasco, Victor Paredes, and Luis Rosero. So I'm going to ask each of them to just give a little background on their experiences and what they're currently doing.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Ed. Mitzi Lopez Baranello. I'm a group director in planning and strategy at Huge, which is a full-service digital agency. And I have been at Huge for about 4 years, managing a variety of digital marketing and platform development projects in automotive, financial services, and a few other categories. Before that, I managed brand and advertising planning in the Lexus division of Toyota Motor Sales.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Newman Carrasco, and I head up Hispanic strategy at Walton Isaacson, which is an agency in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, that is a total transcultural agency, and Lexus is one of our clients, both Lexus Corporate and the Lexus Dealer Association as well, in the Hispanic space, as well as African American, LGBT, and other, particular cultural markets. I've been working with Walton Isaacson for the last 7 years, but I've been in the U.S. Hispanic marketing space for 33. I started when I was really young, but I only throw that out for perspective because I've been able to watch the market evolve and marketers evolve in the Hispanic marketing space over the last 3 and change decades.
Hello, my name is Victor Paredes, and I am Managing Director at Spike DDB. Spike DDB is a cultural branding agency, a boutique agency led by Director Spike Lee, and we specialize in very many different aspects of culture and bringing it forward. I've spent the better part of my career in diversity and multicultural marketing, as well as entertainment and music, and hopefully we'll be able to share some insight today. Thank you.
Hi, Luis Rosero, Director of Toyota's Hispanic Business Strategy Group, which is really a new group, about 3 years old, that was focusing on the U.S. Hispanic consumer in the United States. I'm not a lifelong automotive person. I've spent most of my time between government and finance, but I've been with Toyota for about 5 years, but I've focused a number of years on the U.S. Hispanic consumer market in the U.S.
Excellent. So we've got a nice mix here, client, agency, and so I think we're going to get some good stuff out of you guys. So this is interesting for me because this year for Cablevision, we actually made an investment in adding a head of multicultural sales for ourselves. It's an area that we feel is really untapped. We see as a great growth opportunity for our business. So I'm looking forward to learning from you guys today. To just set it up a little bit, there's over 55 million Hispanic Americans accounting for about 17% of the U.S. population. Those numbers continue to grow, especially among millennials and Generation Z. They buy cars, they buy trucks, but the challenges still exist to reach them. Automakers want to reach the so-called transcultural mainstream, but generalizing can turn many off, which I want to hear more about from you guys as well. Within this segment, there are vastly different cultural orientations, so this demographic is much more than just reaching Hispanic. Within that, you certainly have Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and so forth. So the marketing aspects towards those individual groups, I think, would be somewhat different. So at some point when we get through some of these questions, if you can explain some of that, would be great. That being said, I think that, again, there's a great opportunity within the auto industry, and Hispanic sales in particular have grown and continue to outpace total market figures, with Hispanic sales rate rising in 2015 by 15%, while the general market growth in auto was 5.9%. So it's obviously over-indexing in that regard. So first question, Keller Fay Group, I did a study last year. Hispanics are 26% more likely to be influenced by advertising. Why do you think that is, and what marketing channels do you feel have proven the most effective? I'm going to direct that first question to you, Luis, being from Toyota.
Sure. Good question, and thank you. So I think part of it is a couple of things. So let me start by doing this. I think companies now have to realize, and hopefully they're realizing, if they want to stay relevant and they want to succeed, that the Hispanic market is no longer a niche market. It is a pillar of a U.S. consumer's income or quarterly report, if you wanted to look at it that way. And companies who aren't looking at that in a serious way are really going to become obsolete if you don't have a good handle and a good focus on the U.S. Hispanic consumer. So luckily, Toyota has been doing this for a number of years. For over 25 years, we were one of the first companies to really communicate both in language and in culture to the Hispanic community. And that was a big deal. That, I think, that outreach many years ago in a dedicated and a personal way has really cemented the bond that we have with the U.S. Hispanic consumer. Toyota is #1 for the last 10 years in sales. We're the #1 automotive company with the U.S. Hispanic consumer for over 10 years. There's a lot of brand loyalty, and that happened over multiple years. Let me just also plug for Lexus. Lexus is now also the #1 luxury automotive car for Hispanics in the U.S., and that happened last year. So we started reaching out in culture and in traditional media, television, radio, print, and as the Hispanic community has evolved, so has marketing and advertising. And I think the way we look at things now, especially a company like ours, the way you see this growth in social, digital, video, mobile, we look at these as new opportunities and new channels to be able to talk to our audience and our consumer. So we're looking at this as a multifaceted approach where we still continue to do traditional advertising, radio, print, television to our more traditional Spanish dominant audience. And then you want to talk to folks like myself, fully bilingual, first generation, who are not necessarily getting their news in from the traditional markets in Spanish, but we're taking a total market approach where you have an opportunity to view things through the Hispanic lens. And I think that's what we at Toyota with Hispanic Business Strategy Group are doing. We provide a Hispanic lens for what the company is doing and how they can reach our consumers.
I'm actually really excited about this question because in my nearly 20 years in marketing, one thing that's been consistently true about the Hispanic market is that they are early adopters of new technology. Whether you're talking about ebooks 15 years ago or rich media engagement or smartphones, digital video, diversity markets, but Hispanics in general over-index on their interaction with these channels. So I think if you think about Hispanics broadly, you should be thinking about them as seeking innovation. And I think secondly, the thing that excites me is this idea that advertising can be, especially for the foreign-born and the less acculturated subsegment of the Hispanic market, can provide cultural context and cues for people who are looking to just learn more about society, culture, the languages to use, interesting things that are happening. So I think from my perspective, the reasons that online advertising and Hispanics are so open to advertising in general is, again, because of this curiosity about innovation and also this idea that they see advertising as providing cultural context to sort of continue to understand the world around them. In terms of the channels that we have found to be most effective in the digital space, social, absolutely. I think that has been something that we've seen great success at. And also digital video most recently. We see a lot of success with Hispanic cultural themes in web series or in video work.
I'm just going to, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to add on to what Luis and Mitzi were saying, and I'll do it from a luxury perspective, because, there's this myth that with income goes culture, somehow goes away. There's a belief system sometimes that with income, and, I remember a young woman, an influential, an actress, Latina actress, very bilingual, very bicultural, but she had a very poignant point, which was, I don't need you to speak to me in Spanish, but you ignored me when my parents and I couldn't buy a luxury car. So I need to know that you know I exist. And I think that that's a really important, insight to understand that the use of in common or in language, in culture, and then what I like to call in common, isn't really always dedicated to what someone's dominant language is, but what someone's cultural context, like you say, is. So, I think that there are language choices that we make contextually. So it's not an either-or proposition, it's an and proposition, and then you need to seek out. So when we do digital, we're as likely to get leads, qualified leads on the luxury side when we run work in English as when we run work in Spanish. You just have to know who you're talking to and why you're talking to them in what language.
Two dimensions that I'd like to add to what's already been said. In your original question, you ask about the more responsiveness to advertising, and then you ask about channels. In terms of more responsiveness, one thing that is important is not to fall into a belief that a particular ethnic group has a genetic predisposition to respond to advertising any which way. The reason why you see a number that is that way is because it is underutilized. So if you are under-targeted, then you are going to experience higher response rate because there's less fatigue. It's a reflection of investment, which brings me to the second point, which is that in terms of channels, yes, you would have to do the responsible math and segmentation to determine what are the appropriate channels for your mix. But I think we are in the place where if we want real change and get to a place where we can actually take advantage of the business opportunity that Luis points out, you have to treat the media the same way. And so there's many media representatives in the room, and ask yourselves how many times there's a lot of goodies in your media plans that come with your cable packages that reach 0.0 people. And yet, if you're going to consider culturally targeted providers who have massively larger audiences, they have to justify millions of things. So if you do your math correctly, then your plans are going to start to be more integrated, and your channels are going to be the channels that they need to be in order to take advantage of a diverse America.
Excellent. Michelle, you mentioned something, and I think maybe even Mitzi did as well, in regards to messaging and whether it's done in English or Spanish. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because I think one of the things, there's a perception potentially on the side, especially on the vendor side of the business, that we have to allow for messaging in Spanish only. Is that true, or what are the nuances within that you guys can identify that we should be sensitive to?
Yeah, the word only is where you lose. Right. So there is no only. Bilingualism, biculturalism, there's a reason it's bi. It's because both things exist at the same time. I think one of my favorite things to do to help people who aren't bilingual, someone once said, I think it was Luis Castañeda, the author, said, bilingualism is monolingualism. Monolingualism is a curable disease. It's unfortunate that language isn't encouraged, enough in our school systems and so on, but the Latino community, by and large, has kept some degree of bilingualism. It's not Yiddish. I mean, it's not a dying language. So when I like to go to Facebook feeds and show people, I have a friend who's Blaxican, which is a black Mexican, Francisco McCurry. Well, you go to Francisco's McCurry, and he's a millennial, and he's a hipster. You go to his Facebook feed, and I just did this the other day, so it's fresh in my mind. He's circulating a Despierta America video of a young Latina child who's become quite the activist and is talking to Jorge Ramos in Spanish and in English. He's got, all sorts of hip-hop stuff going on. He's got Willie Colon. He's got... he's got every language and derivation of his world, right? So only is where you lose, where don't think in only, don't think in binary terms or in terms of either or. Bilingualism and trilingualism even is something that is fluid and flows, and you have to be able to use the languages to your best advantage. It's a surgical thing. I think people sometimes think about language as a have to do, like medicine. I have to do this in Spanish. You hear that a lot. I have to do this in Spanish. I have to take my medicine. If Spanish can give you a competitive edge in this and cut through the clutter emotionally in this highly competitive world, then stop resisting the notion that this is somehow a negative thing or a old school thing or a disposable thing. And just really fast, one last anecdote, because I can tell, is my husband is a Panamanian Shakespearean trained actor, and I had a client once ask me, he's very bilingual, and I had a client once ask me, well, does he only speak Spanish when he's feeling lazy? And when I got my off the table. I thought maybe she meant tired. I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. But for bilingual people, it's not an effort. It's not like you had to learn, I'm sorry a lot of you took French in high school, but there's always time.
I think people want to feel welcome. I think that's the bottom line. I think people want to feel welcome, that the brand or whatever, they're talking to them and they feel they're part of something, that they're not an outsider, but they're part of the inside. And in our case, Toyota is important, it's relevant, it's culturally sensitive, and it makes sense. Aside from making great, dependable cars, there's a reason why for 25 years we have been working very, very diligently with the community. At the end of the day, it becomes about personal relationships and how people feel, that confianza, that confidence that people have towards the feeling. It's much more difficult if you have a bad experience, there's a multiplier effect within the Hispanic family. Says, oh, don't go there because we had a really bad experience. And that can really damage a brand, whatever it could be. It could be a jar of mayonnaise, or it could be buying a house. Quite the opposite when you have a good experience and people feel good about whether they're walking into a Toyota dealership, or they're listening to one of our commercials, or they're attending one of the health festivals or sponsorships that we're doing with one of the national organizations. I think it's a question about feeling welcome and being able to talk to them in a very important and sensitive manner. And that's been one of our secret recipes for success. 25 years, 10 years being number one. It's almost pretty simple.
I would just like to add some dimension and simplicity to the question. In terms of dimension, Spanish is the second largest spoken language in terms of business globally. So if you intend to be a global brand, why not? Right? It adds to the cachet of being a global brand. If you cannot speak the language of global business, then you are not a global brand. And if you're not a global brand, the value of your brand starts to suffer. In terms of simplicity, ask yourself, in terms of analogies, other aspects of advertising or messaging in which you don't question the customization. For example, if anyone here is a Super Bowl sponsor, you don't question that you're going to spend an inordinate amount of money for a one-time event piece of advertising. If you are a NCAA tournament sponsor, this is college kids and a limited March Madness run, you don't question that you're going to have that kind of piece of work in place. So why would you have to question and reason how to reach the group of people and the media outlets that are reaching 2- and 5-fold of that kind of audience? It's a false choice, if you will. I think the moment that we start to ask the question and entertain it, we have unfortunately fallen into a false choice.
I think there's two sort of considerations that I would give to that question. The first is to follow up on something Rochelle said earlier. Do you want to make your Spanish-speaking, your bilingual, your Hispanic consumers feel welcome? Knowing that you have, whether it's marketing, whether it's on your site, a Spanish language presence is a cue that you are welcoming them. Again, to Luis's point about welcoming. And secondly, I think that regardless of how English or Spanish dominant they are, there is within all of us Latinos an emotionality to the language. Whether you speak it every day at home or whether it was the language that you grew up in, I find, at least in a lot of our marketing programs, that having some bilingual language in there, having some Spanish language in there, from a marketing perspective, drives more engagement and more sort of love of the brand. And the flip side of that, too, is, a lot of Spanish speakers will actually prefer to look at more functional information in English. So I think it was Google, they did their Think with Google platform did a study not too long ago, and I think 28% of their sample was Spanish speakers, and about half of them actually said that they preferred to look at content in English. And again, part of that is and I don't want to make that that emotionality point there necessarily, but I think that there is a desire to understand the language that they're going to do business in. But at the same time, Spanish is a great way to connect with these consumers emotionally. So I don't know if that was clear, but.
That's good. So, over the last 20 years, marketing and advertising towards a multicultural segments has changed dramatically. From the earlier models, what has stayed consistent? What continues to work? And if not, if there's been that much of a change where there's new, new ways about going after that target audience, what would that be?
So this is, I think, an interesting one because I think in the Latino audience that influencers, whether you're talking about the traditional days of leveraging celebrities in Spanish language commercials, or whether you're talking now about the Latina mom, the mom that's in Los Angeles, who's a Chicana, who is absolutely blogging every day, I think the role of influencers in the market continues to be as relevant, but the channels that you leverage those influencers in has changed significantly. So I find that when we do these marketing programs with, whether it's our CPG clients or our auto clients, there's so much content and so much opportunity and so much desire to get brands involved in that conversation.
I think the spirit is the same as, the spirit is, let me be relevant to this consumer. But, I like to say that all marketing is multicultural marketing. And that is the big difference, because when there were 8 million Latinos in the United States, it was hard to make a case for the Latino. There were always English-speaking Latinos. It's not like we were like, oh, really? Where'd they come? No, there were always English-dominant Latinos. There was just critical mass on the Spanish language side. Now you've got critical mass across all of the spectrum. And frankly, you have an older dying population, you have younger thought leaders in the African American community and the Hispanic community in terms of fashion, design, in the Asian communities and so on, LGBTQ. So blow up, I'm not a big fan of the words diversity and inclusion for the following reason. I think they've started to become code for adversity and inclusion, where you're still going to have to play by the rules that were already there. And so, by lumping everybody together that somehow is other, we got to blow up the model, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's the big shift is there's enough critical mass of people who are going to say, yeah, basta, enough. We're going to blow up the model and be represented across, like Mia, sorry, I have a cold, I'm not just randomly holding a piece of paper. Like Mia said this morning about transcultural mainstream. We got to blow up the words, the language, and the model.
Yeah, I would agree that the models of diversity and inclusion have got us to today, but we have to get on a pace to evolve aggressively towards a world of competence and discovery. And the thing that we haven't done well in the diversity sectors is actually to do just that, to discover, to implement, and learn in a way that we can really get ahead of it, both from a media standpoint as well as a basic culture standpoint. I'll give you a very simple example on culture. When the recession of 2007 hit, all of a sudden the U.S. discovered the idea of multi-generational households and the idea of living within your means and the idea of working with your networks, whereas in communities of color, they've been doing that for decades. So it was not so much of a novel idea that when times get tough, that's what you do, right? Or the idea that maybe you're returning from college and staying home. These were all premises that everyone was kind of scratching their heads as novel, whereas communities of color have always seen those dynamics. So had we been in touch with culture, you'd have uncovered those insights much sooner than 2008 in a world. Technology, we talked earlier about how technology is early adopters. The communities of color in the Latino, Black, and Asian communities have always been cord cutters. They keep cutting every cord you put in front of them. So when it comes from the phone to the wireless device, they went straight to the wireless device. When it came to broadband versus other forms of internet, they went quickly to the fastest form. And as we get into a world of a connected world and connected devices, if we continue the same old paradigms, we're once again going to be too late to the insights that are being driven, especially when millennials and Gen Z are approaching half not white.
Great. You know, so much of what we talk about these days is centered around data, all right, and the collection of data, the use of data. So, Luis, I want to start with you, if you don't mind. How does Toyota, use data? What do they find is working for them, to reach this segment?
So we use various types of data. We have qualitative, we have quantitative, we have ethnograph studies. I mean, we really have a number of things that we look at before we target our audience for a specific vehicle. A lot of it's proprietary, so I can't really get into detail. But a lot of the data that we look at could be from habits, and we look at future trends. A lot of the future trends that we were talking about. But I also think that there are some basic trends that go from the beginning to now that continue to be core pillars of how you're able to target, especially when we are talking about multi-generational households. That's really important, especially if you have media, if you have your parents or grandparents still reading a Spanish-speaking newspaper or watching Spanish-speaking television, as opposed to someone like me or my nephew, who are now receiving all their information on different platforms. So we look at that, and we look at the opportunities that we can to really reach them. There was one campaign that started off as a consumer thank you campaign for us, again, being number one for the last 10 years. It's called Más que un auto. And that was really a social media, it was a campaign that we were talking about, and started off as a social media thank you. So basically what we found out there are a lot of nicknames. Latinos like to nickname their cars. Speedy, Peppy, whatever it was. There's a name for that vehicle. That vehicle is there for a long time. So we wanted to say thank you. We wanted to say thank you to the community. And what we did was, if you have a car, a Corolla, Toyota, whatever it is, go on we created an entire social media campaign where they can go and have their name, and they would receive a nameplate that they can stick on the back of their car. Not a license plate, but right above the tagline, they can put whatever they personalize and put it in there. So that social media campaign to say thank you blew up beyond our entire expectations. It won a bronze Cannes Lion, multi-awards. It was just, I think the first month exceeded our 6-month spread. But that was because we connected. And the reason why we have to do that is you have to engage. It can't be a one-way street. You have to show what you have, follow your outlets, but you also want to have some sort of an engagement mechanism with your consumers, whether they're older or younger. And we found that one to be extremely successful, and something that we're looking to replicate in other new ways.
Great. Anybody else on that one?
I mean, I think in terms of data that we are flooded in it. And I think in the era of data, it's not that it's not important, it's that what we need is big perspective. When we look at data, one of the more interesting, provocative things that is happening is the applicability of things like Watson. And so as in the world of today, what should be happening with social data and all this data is actually, artificial intelligence learning, so that, because what's lacking is not the data, what's lacking is what to do with the data. And the answer to what to do with the data is not in more data, it's in finding novel, provocative ways to mine the data, to put it to good use. And so that is the challenge, because surely when you look at data, the data tells you who we are. I mean, my clients, just as the Toyota team, look at data and are able to see that, that better than anywhere between 33 to 100% of all sales growth in the automotive category is coming from the Latino community, is coming from other communities of color. The question is not the data, the question is what are you going to do about it? And we need greater perspective, more innovative ideas, including the communities of color early on in those processes. That's where you do the inclusion. in the data gathering so that the data sets are colored by the correct insights and the right knowledge, intelligence, and actions surface as a result of the data.
Building on that, Victor, you used, on another panel, you asked a question, you used the word cultural competency, because data analysis is based, is only as good as the cultural competency of those who are reading it. Luis mentioned his wife as a doctor, and, it makes me think, when you get blood back and a doctor has to analyze it, culturally, if you're a person of color who's blended, who's a multicultural person who's got black, Latino, a whole, hodgepodge of things, as, again, my husband happens to be black, Latino, and a whole bunch of other stuff. How you read that data of blood is different than if you don't know who the person is. There's actually cultural distinctions going on in data reads. So I apply that to how we look at data, because a lot of people will come to us with data from a general market side or from whatever you want to call it and say, no, you see, they're not doing this. It's like, no, you see, you're misinterpreting the data, because when I add this, this, and this, I can see a behavior that you don't have the cultural experience, the cultural competency like an anthropologist or sociologist to really interpret.
I think you bring up a great point, Rochelle. Just this idea of behavior, especially in the digital world, we're looking for where have you been and what is it that you're looking for? Your brand is your brand. Your benefits are your benefits. Your features are your features. How you position those, prioritize those, talk about those, should change most likely based on that behavior that they're exhibiting, those cues that they're giving to you about what they want, what they need, and the companies that are able to do that effectively, able to learn over time, are the ones that are going to be more successful, not just with Hispanics, but really with all consumer segments. An add-on to that is again, when you look at, Luis talked about the wonderful array of qualitative and quantitative research methods and analytics that we have available to us in this day and age. There's a ton of data that we can surf through. But it's all about understanding what those subsegments are. What are those attitudinal segments, those behavioral segments, and how do you prioritize those groups in your marketing?
Great. I know we're running up against a little bit, but so I have one question I really wanted to try to get you guys to, give me some feedback on. There are about 40 million households in the United States today, or more than that actually, that can offer targeted TV advertising. And I was going to ask this within the context of your overall media mix, but I don't think we have enough time. So now with the ability to actually combine set-top box data with third-party data sets, and then to deliver spots to specific households with specific messages, a la digital, is that something that your clients are getting more interested in? Have you had any experiences so far where you're executing against that, and what do you see the future of it?
Well, everybody's looking at me.
Yeah, no,
Well, I'll jump in to give a response, an angle of it, right? Not the full thing. I would say the first thing, my first reaction to your question is beware of the third set of cord cutters, right? Because again, we are faced with great set-top box data, ignoring the fact that an overwhelming majority of communities of color are cutting that too, and just going straight to OTT solutions, right? And so if your strategies are all going to be set-box based, well, you are now behind the times in a significant way. So that's the first part of it. But the second part, more constructively looking at it from a standpoint of personalization, right? And I think that's what your question kind of points to, which is as we move towards greater digital integration, greater social media tools, greater data, the information exchanges and the relationships and the experiences we create are more one-to-one. And so we have to find the ways to use those things to move past mass kind of creations of content to more individual, personalized, one-on-one pieces of content.
Right, I think that's important, is personalization. I think that's the key. It's not a one-step approach. We opened up talking about the Hispanic community is obviously not a homogeneous population. It's very, very different. The way you talk to folks in Florida is much different from New York versus California versus Texas. So you have to look at this, but it's a great opportunity. You have all of these vertical opportunities, and I think companies, whether it's Toyota or other companies, you certainly want to make sure that you can explore what are the proper opportunities to reach your targets. The consumer spending power for the Latino community in the U.S. is it's already past $1.5 trillion, and that's the economy of Canada, just to give you a scale. Everybody wants a piece of that. So when you have opportunities, you have to look for the right ones, you have to look for the right data, because you're right, data could be manipulated, data could be older, it could be not exactly what you're looking for, but you have to look at all the different pieces to find out how best to target and go after your customer. But I just think, again, personalization, and people need to feel welcome. Early on, I remember some folks, and not at this company where I was beforehand, it was just a matter of, okay, translate a press release, and that was the strategy. Those days are long, long gone. Personalization of 5, 10 second videos, messages, those are the ones that really matter now. So people really need to figure out the best way to keep up and think of the future.
Yeah,
Ross?
great. Yeah, thank you, Ed. Thank you, panel. We could do a question or two if there are any from the audience. Anybody?
Once,
Everybody's
twice.
No?
tired.
Going once, twice? People are tired?
Got one.
Oh, there we go.
Name's Henry. I'm with a company called Instinctive. I was kind of wondering, in the context of Hispanic marketing, how the messaging changes, both because I know a lot of brands just take the English language message and just translate it. And then there's also the other angle of creating bespoke content for that audience. How do you deal with that challenge? And is there a different approach? Because I would say mass media, I guess the national brands tend to be very TV focused, right? Like that's the level that you enter at to reach the audience. It's the best thing, the best format, right, for reaching that audience. I would imagine for Hispanic it might be different just because of the heightened impact of digital.
I think, at least from a digital perspective, the easiest way into that is prioritization. So as I was saying before, your brand is your brand, your benefits are your benefits. The way that you position those benefits is going to rely on your insight about a Spanish speaker within your who is in your segment or potentially looking at your brand. So I think sort of the easiest way into that is, yes, looking at your overall message inventory and understanding how your different Latino segments or Spanish-speaking subsegment is prioritizing those messages. There is, I have found over time, a need for bespoke content because the tone and the sort of the types of messages that tend to resonate more among Latino consumers. For example, in a social media context, there's just a different tone, a more optimistic tone, a more sort of longer-term visionary tone that at least gets a lot more responses from the Hispanic market. Not to overgeneralize, but I think there is a need for bespoke content. And it's just a matter of understanding your consumers. But on a site or an owned property perspective, that message inventory should at least start with the features and benefits that you are confident about.
Yeah, I really think that the brands should take this opportunity to find a moment of discovery in the work that they do, even if it's culturally targeted. A couple of examples from Spike DDB that, in our work with Cadillac, there was work that we did that, by paying attention to the luxury segment from a Hispanic perspective, gave us some unique colors about how they share that thinking. And the ideas we developed were great, and they were used for Hispanic. And then eventually the dealer system said, hey, why aren't we running that in general? And it got run in general. But you would have never arrived at that ad had we tried to answer an overarching one-size-fits-all, include everything kind of strategy. It came from drilling down deep with one group of folks, discovering something and then allowing it to be applied everywhere else. So same with that, same with some work that we did for Chevrolet when it comes to Major League Baseball, and acknowledging that there is something unique about baseball, bringing it forward, and then being able to tell a broader story. So allowing yourself to discover, genuinely discover, from the different niches, whether they're ethnic, whether they're gender, whether they are sexual orientation, you can discover great things and then realize that they have a broader potential. And I think that's the great opportunity that gets missed very, very often in a multicultural space.
I talked about the Moscow Auto campaign earlier. That was started as a multicultural campaign, but it became so popular that we're looking to broaden that and to go general market. And again, you have to have, and we've been working with an agency for over 25 years, Coneal. So we have someone who's been focused and working on this, and we've been doing our due diligence. And I think a lot of it goes back to that, be able to really understand and talk to people in a very culturally relevant way.
You know, it goes beyond language, is value systems, right? So even when you're dealing, with a spot in English, that doesn't mean you can't re-script it or imagine it with understanding the value system. And, and as, was said, a lot of the work that we do on Lexus, it runs in both, English and in Spanish, and it's made its way, or on the African American side, we had a spot that wound up in the Super Bowl. Wasn't intended for the Super Bowl originally, but it was a great spot against the African American target and has a universality. So, look for those opportunities and don't be so literal about language or the limitations of language, and open up that value-based thinking.
Great. All right. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, panel.
Thank
That's
you.
going to do it for us, and that's going to do it for me and the Marketing Auto Show. But please stick around. We have a couple of events coming up. We've got the Marketing Auto Awards, which will happen, in the next 5 minutes or so? Go ahead. Are you on? You're not on.
I'm on. Thanks to the panel. Anybody with questions, feel free to approach them. I saw some hands up. So this is what's going to happen now. We're going to have about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to present the Marketing Automotive Awards to 5 winners, automotive companies who've shown excellence in marketing throughout the year. But an important thing about access to the show floor, how that will work. First of all, you have to have a Marketing Automotive badge or a Marketing Automotive Awards badge. Look, the conference badge looks like this, if you can see it. And if you don't have one, if you happen to walk in here, and it's okay without one, but you were registered for the show, you can go out to the registration desk and pick your badge up in the next 10 minutes, and then you'll be all set. And after the awards presentation is over, we're going to have a short cocktail party outside. Again, if you have the badge, the correct badge, you'll be welcome to have a drink on us before you go to the show floor. And then, to go to the show floor, you're going to need 2 items. There's a ticket that you won't be able to get in the door without a ticket, and there's a wristband you have to put on, because they're going to take the ticket from you, and you put the wristband on, and then you'll be able to, they won't kick you out, I guess, once you get in there. You walk around with the wristband. Those who have a red wristband, who are in this room, don't really need anything from us to get to the show floor. So if you happen to have come into the room here with a red band, you're all set. So that's how it's going to work. We're going to get back together in 10 minutes to honor some great automotive marketers. Please be with us.